Welcome to the Fear and Greed Daily Interview. I'm Sean Aylmer. Australia is set to see its biggest ever immigration intake, with 650,000 net new immigrants arriving over the next 2 years. It's remarkable when you consider that just a couple of years ago, when borders were closed, we saw Australia's first net migration loss since World War II. So, what does this influx mean for labour shortages, for infrastructure, for housing availability, property prices, etc., etc.? Simon Kuestenmacher is the co-founder of the Demographics Group, our favourite demographer here on Fear and Greed. Simon, welcome back.
It's good to be on.
So, what's the likely makeup of this group? 650,000 over a couple of years, net new migrants. Is it skilled migration, students, who?
Well, so the big immediate drive of migrants will be international students, because there is so much pent-up demand in the market here. These are people that could not come to Australia for the better half of 2 years, and so they just didn't come. And now they are coming in vast numbers, because the universities, of course, rely on them for an income source. And other than this, we see backpackers drop in as well in relatively decent numbers. And most importantly, we operate, of course, still a skilled migration list, because any industry that you will have spoken to over the last years will have told you about a skills shortage. And so we're just fighting to, fill those skills shortages across all industries.
I've heard you recently talk about the benefits of migration, why it's so good for the economy. Just explain that.
Well, so just economically speaking, it is much cheaper and more lucrative to grow a population based on migration rather than on making more babies. You want to remember that the first, let's call it 22, 23 years before you become a taxpayer yourself, they're very expensive to bring up. You're being born, kindergarten, school, university, medical costs. There's lots of costs associated. If you just take people from overseas, those costs are carried by another country. It's almost unbelievable that we get away with such a good economic deal.
I had never thought of it that way. That's so true. What about the other end of life? So pensioners and people where we have a social security payments to who haven't been here. Is that part of the economic calculation or not?
Well, obviously the idea is that in Australia, we introduced the superannuation scheme in order to make sure that almost all people, or as many people as possible, pay for their own retirement. Because we put a gun to your head, we say you have to put 10% of your money into this little box. This box is yours. And by the end of your life, you pay for all your costs through your superannuation. That's a rather smart approach. It also will lead to increased political stability, because nobody can take your money away from you. Whereas in Germany or in France, where there is just one single bucket, theoretically any government can change your pension payouts. And so there is always the opportunity that there is political unrest if somebody suggests this. And in Australia, we are guaranteeing political stability, because there's no need for a crazy party to promise you a safe pension, because your pension actually is safe through the superannuation scheme.
Okay, so let's get back to net migrants. A lot of commentators at the moment are saying one of the reasons house prices might not fall quite as much is because there's such a huge migrant intake. I get that in the short term, but does migration and housing have much of a link in the medium to longer term?
Well, obviously, there's a relationship between the number of houses that are on the market and the number of people that are competing to live in these houses. There's a clear and obvious link. The real scandal here is that we have a national housing policy and a national migration policy that aren't linked to each other. That is just pure madness and utterly unnecessary. You could easily fix this. There are plenty of arguments to say why we should have a large Australia, big Australia policy. We're aging like crazy. The number of people 85 plus is doubling over the next 12 years alone. If you're in your 70s right now, do you think in a decade you'll have a carer? Think again. The way things are currently going, you will not have enough care workers. The only way we can even remotely think of having a decent retirement in 10, 20 years' time is when we amp up migration, when we create care workers through migration. So plenty of arguments for a large migration approach, but we are building ourselves into trouble because we're not building enough housing. So it's a supply side issue as far as I'm concerned, and we in this country have plenty of unnecessary roadblocks in order to increase more housing. Local government areas have a lot of power to block development. A local government area, a local council should block every development, whether it's useful or not, because somebody that votes them into power will hate this development. And if the development is really needed, VCAT or NCAT or whoever will just push it through anyway. So all these blocking veto powers should be taken away from local government if we want to continue to grow Australia via, at those rates of 300,000-400,000 people per year.
Okay, so that suggests that certainly there'll be a shortage of houses, particularly if the policies aren't linked, and presumably that will do something to property prices. What about away from property, though? Infrastructure. Are our major cities, is regional Australia ready for this number of new migrants?
No, absolutely not. If you line up all the state and federal budgets that are currently in circulation, and you just count all the infrastructure projects that people are willing to pay for, you just have to laugh because we don't have the workforce to build all those things. And we do have about, let's call it 20 years worth of infrastructure backlog in this country. We can build so much stuff without running out of useful things to add to this country. We do need to build infrastructure now. There will be always fights about infrastructure. Infrastructure in Australia is unnecessarily politicized. You've heard so many stories of this party says the tunnel is on, that party says the tunnel is off, and that continues for 20 years. We don't get stuff done. There's no reason why we couldn't have a body like Infrastructure Australia being handed more power. A technocratic body that decides which infrastructure projects gets built so that you don't politicize them. And the politicians only decide how much money is being put aside for infrastructure projects. There's no reason we couldn't do this other than political elites liking the influence, the power.
Stay with me, Simon. We'll be back in a minute. My guest this morning is Simon Kuestenmacher, co-founder of the Demographics Group. Okay, what about labour markets? Surely an influx of migrants is a good thing when your unemployment rate's 3.5%.
Oh, absolutely. It's the only way out. Whatever industry you're talking to, they are all desperate for workers. And we really, from the labor perspective, from the idea to drive the economy up, we do need migrants. There's no way around this because we don't have the right pipeline for care workers, for medical workers, for engineering, for lots of high-skilled jobs. There's no way we can produce this in-house with the economy wanting to grow. So we need to look elsewhere. And I know that lots of people have sound arguments to argue against a large Australia policy. But if you argue for a small Australia policy, you need to fix healthcare crisis. You need to ensure that the Australian business model, the industries in Australia can actually operate. And I've not seen a plausible path to this. So I do therefore think we are better off accepting that this is going to be a large migration approach and then build the cities and the infrastructure that we need to make life wonderful and beautiful for everyone. So we want to be the architects of our future rather than the victims of our own future.
Okay, so let's assume we are heading down a big Australia path. We talk about what we need. What is something that we could do or government could do now or in the next 3 months? Is it having Infrastructure Australia with more power? Is it about having a better linking housing policy with migration policy? Is it about making sure that the skilled immigrants that come in, have the skills we want? And you're not allowed to say all of those things. What's the most important thing or things that we should be doing right now?
Well, a quick fix is to really set realistic housing targets for each and every local government area and say you'll have to provide that much more housing. This is built into the strategic plans of our capital cities as well anyways. You say you'll need to accommodate that many developments, that many new houses in your area. And if you fail to do so, funding is being withheld from local government areas. If you fail to do so for another year, your council gets put under administration. And if you've ever spoken to public servants that work for a council that has been put under administration, you will know that those people love a council that's under administration, because they say they've never gotten that much stuff done. So this is really putting on the pressure on at least the hurdles that we have on the public government end of things.
One final question, and I can't help it as a Gen Xer myself. Is it something that is generational, these challenges? So is it something that baby boomers, Gen X, millennials are kind of better at handling, or have, or a probably better way of putting that, are worse at thinking about than other generations?
Well, you can be quite cynical, and you say that the concern of what the economy looks like, what the housing market looks like, is only an issue for the young people. If you are Gen X, you're already a mortgage holder. If you're baby boomer, you're definitely owning a house already. So they don't have much need to think about how much the economy is growing in the future. That is a young person's thing. And we then need to go, well, how do we want to proactively reshape our cities? And that's not an easy thing, because the way that our cities are operating will need to change if we continue to grow. If we grow our country at 4 or 5 million people each decade, we can't just add those people evenly across all those cities. We will eventually need to think about which of the relatively small cities will we want to turn into major cities. So I'm thinking about Geelongs and Newcastles of this country that will probably see a major boost if we think about restructuring where people live.
It's a fascinating topic. Simon, thank you for talking to us. It's been about 6 months, I think. And before we came on the show, you conceded to me. I asked why you were in Australia, and you said, I spent a semester at university 15 years ago and met a girl. And I think that's one of the loveliest comments you've made to me today.
Well, it's nothing but the truth.
It's great. Simon, thank you for talking to Fear and Greed.
Thank you for having me. It's been a pleasure.
That was Simon Kuestenmacher, co-founder of the Demographics Group. This is the Fear and Greed Daily Interview. Join us every morning for the full episode of Fear and Greed, Australia's most popular business podcast. I'm Sean Aylmer. Enjoy your day.